Hello, I'm Li Hao. So if you're using Rollup or Webpack to build your project, I need to show you something. Take a look at this. If your project takes roughly 30 to 40 seconds to build, if you're using esbuild to build your project, it'll take you 0.33 seconds. That's 100 times faster than you would have to build for Rollup and Webpack. No more hitting Webpack build and take a coffee because it builds instantly. So today we are taking a look at this new module bundler, esbuild, to see why it's so fast and how we can use esbuild. So for those who don't know about esbuild, it is a relatively new module bundler introduced in the year 2020. So why is it so fast? Well, let's take a step back. Let's think about this problem together. Imagine you are tasked to improve the build time of your module bundler, say even Webpack or Rollup. What are the ideas that you can come up with? Well, probably we can improve our code, figure out where's the bottleneck, improve on them. And because JavaScript is single-threaded, there's only one line of code being run at any point of time in your program. There's a limit of how fast you can go. But for module bundlers, there's a lot of things that can be done simultaneously. Say, resolving and then transforming the files and bundle them, right? You can apply the transformation in parallel across all the files, and that's something that you can introduce workers to help you parallelize them. And if it's not fast enough, what should you do? Well, how about let's rethink the whole problem again. Maybe the problem itself is in JavaScript. The language is great. It has a lot of community packages. You can install whatever you need from npm and then piece everything together and build your module bundlers. But if you're given enough time, infinite time to rethink this and rework this and make things faster, probably you can think about rewrite the whole module bundlers in a different language. Well, that's what esbuild did. Well, the author of esbuild, Evan Wallace, rewrites everything in entirely new language, Golang. And Golang is a compile-based language. You compile Golang into binaries and then run them. It even saves time for having JavaScript engine to parse your code and does just-in-time optimization. So here are the things that Golang have built in that JavaScript does not have. Right? It has Go routines, which is a way for Golang code to do parallel work. In JavaScript, you would have to import workers, maintain them, and instruments them to do work for you. But in Golang, you can do that with Go routine with a lot of built-in semantics. And there's one thing that esbuild does to make things even faster is that it implements its own JavaScript or TypeScript and CSS parser. But why does implementing your own JavaScript parser or CSS parser makes things faster? What's the difference between importing a JavaScript parser and then let it do it for you? Why do you have to implement it yourself? Well, for starter, there's a lot of things that you can collect along the way when you're doing the parsing, such as where you are using the import statements, where is it being dynamically import. If you're using a generic JavaScript parser, those information are not collected when it's being parsed. Right, so the parser will parse the JavaScript into an abstract syntax tree for you, and then you still have to traverse through the tree and figure out where is it being used, where is the import being used, and collect those information. So there's you do it in two pass rather than one pass through your own JavaScript parser. And secondly, esbuild implements its own transpiling method. It transforms your code to support older browsers. And for Webpack and Rollup, that's being handled by a JavaScript library called Babel. So why is this faster? Every time Webpack sees a JavaScript code, it hands it over to Babel. Babel parses it, transforms it, and generates a JavaScript code for older browser. Webpack then takes this and sends it to a parser to parse the old JavaScript code for older browser. And then out it goes with a abstract syntax tree so that Webpack can process it. See, Webpack lets Babel to parse the JavaScript into AST, transform into a code, and then parse it to another parser to parse it again to a AST, and then Webpack process it. But why do we need two parsers? Oh, because Babel is written not the same way as how the parser that Webpack uses. So the AST that they both generates are different. So Webpack does not able to consume this AST coming from Babel, and Babel cannot pass this AST to Webpack directly. So it has to generate code out from the AST and then reparse it again to a AST, which is a representation that Webpack can understand. Well, there is the double work over here. So esbuild is faster not just because it's written in entirely different language. It also implements its own parser so that this work is not double done on 2 times, right? It parses the code and then understands it, and then before it bundles out, it transforms the code for older browsers if you are targeting older browsers, and that's it, right? So implement its own parser has benefits, and it's evidently in the speed that esbuild provides. So we've learned so much about how amazing esbuild is there a drawback, or why are we not using this right now? Well, there are still kinks in the bundlers, especially if you're if you have code that has some edge cases. For example, code splitting is not enabled by default because code splitting itself still has some gotchas. For example, if you're enabling code splitting, the output format will only have to be ES modules, which means older browser that does not support ES modules can't enjoy code splitting from esbuild. Luckily, there's still a lot of other ways that you can tap into the power of esbuild. You can use the parsing and transforming capability of esbuild so that you can replace Babel with esbuild and use Webpack or Rollup to do the bundling for you. That's how tools like Vite is tapping the power of esbuild. Well, enough of the introduction of esbuild, so let's take a look at how we can use esbuild to build code for us. Right, so let's take a look over here. So here I've prepared a sample project. I have source folder with index.js, and then it imports a.js and b.ts. So here b is a TypeScript file. You can see there's some type notification and stuff like that, right? And so esbuild by itself, by default, supports JavaScript and TypeScript. There's nothing special you need to set up, right? It just understands both of them. So the first thing we're going to do is to install esbuild. Yarn add esbuild. So that's all you need, esbuild itself, right? So now to build this, we're gonna use esbuild with a few options. Right, so first of all, if you want to bundle something, you have to pass in -- bundle. Right, so that is more of like commands, right? You can bundle, you can transform, you can minify, and things like that. And then you need to specify where's the entry file. So here, source index.js is the entry file. We're gonna say source index.js. Let's run enter. Really, you can see the bundle output being shown on the screen, right? This is very similar when we use rollup. The output will be logged out in the standard output. If you want to output it to a file, then you have to specify the out file option. So here I'm going to say out file equals to this index.js. So the file is written into the this.index.js. If you come over here, you'll find a this folder with index.js with the bundle content. Same thing with rollup and webpack. You can use the CLI to build for you, or you could also use a Node API that allows you to easily integrate with your build script and your build process. So here, let's take a look at how we can use the esbuild Node API to build for you. So here I'm come over here and create a file called build with esbuild. So let's import esbuild. Esbuild equals require esbuild. And there's a few options, there's a few methods, right? Build, most of the methods, there's a synchronous version and asynchronous version. A synchronous version will return you a promise so that you can wait for it. And synchronous version just does it immediately and not returning a promise, right? So for this demo, I'm just going to use the synchronous version, so we're not play around with the promises. So here you pass in options for a build. Right? Remember when we use a CLI, what are the options, right? First is we pass in the bundle options. So bundle equals to true. And then we specify our entry files, right? So that is in the entry point. Here I'm going to say source index.js. And then lastly, we say we will output it to somewhere, right? Which is the out file option. So here I'm going to say out file goes to this index.js. But before I run this, maybe I'm going to rename this to something else so that you know that it's actually running, because this is the one that generated from a CLI. Maybe we can have a different name, right? So this is this node, right? So this is generated from the node script. So let's run this script file. So node esbuild with esbuild. Now immediately you can see this folder, this node, and then this is the bundle code from using the node API, right? It's exactly the same as what we have in using a CLI. So that is the esbuild node API. So when you're developing your code, every time when you change your code, you wouldn't want to trigger this esbuild again and again every time when you save your changes, right? So esbuild provides a watch mode that allows you to watch the file changes and then automatically build a new bundle code whenever your file changes. So here, let's take a look at how we can use the watch mode. In CLI, what you do is that you specify the command called watch. So this option called watch. Immediately when you hit enter, you see that build finish and then it's watching for changes. So every time when you come over here to make changes, such as over here, I'm going to say BBB and save it. You see that esbuild noted the file changes and then rebuild for you. So if you look at this output, you realize that this is automatically rebuilt for you every time when there's a changes. So how do you do the same thing with Node API? Right, so for Node API, same thing, everything, all the options that you have over here can be applied in the Node API as well. So you can provide a watch option to the Node API. So I'm going to say watch equals to true. So let's try run this. Node build with esbuild. You realize first thing is that a synchronous build API does not support watch mode, because so what you need now is the asynchronous version of it, right? So we use esbuild build. Let's try run this again. And now, because we didn't console or do anything, we don't know whether this is finished building, but it is, and it's watching right now because it does not end here. And if you try to come over here and make changes, say now we change it to 2Bs, and we save it, and we can see immediately here reflects the changes. Right, so if you want to mimic the behavior that you see on using a CLI, wherever build finish, you have some console, then you can actually do it over here, right? So this now returns a promise, so we can say then we console log build finish. So now starts for watching for changes, right? And watch itself can actually takes in object that has options. So options such as on rebuild, which is a function. And over here we can say maybe console this, right? So console.log build finish. Right, so let's kill this and let's try run this again. Node build with esbuild. Now when it's finished building, you'll see this, and every time when you come over here and make changes, now save it to 4Bs, you see that build finish, and you can come over here and it is finished and it's updated with the latest code that you have. So there you go. That's how you use esbuild watch mode. So oftentimes when you are developing your code, not just needs to watch and then rebuild your code, you also want to view your code on a browser, right? You want a file server to serve the build code for you, Right? In that case, what you need is the serve mode. Right? So you pass esbuild will help you, will serve the file that's being bundled by esbuild for you. Right? So how do we do that? So let's come over here. Let's run esbuild, and let's pass in the serve option. Right? So there's two kinds of serving. First is you serve whatever is being built by esbuild only. Right? You don't serve something else. So if you have other files such as your HTML files or your favicons, those are not built by esbuild. They are not served by this serve commands. Right? So if you hit serve, you see an error. Well, you can't use watch mode together with serve mode. They are two mutually exclusive things. If you have watch mode, esbuild watches your file changes. Every time when you make changes of it, esbuild rebuild your code. But for serve mode, it's different. Serve mode, esbuild does not watch for any file changes, but every time when you request for a file, esbuild will rebuild those files for you and serve the latest version of the code. So anytime when you make changes, it's not rebuilding, but only when you need it, when you request for that file, esbuild rebuild for you. And because of how fast esbuild is building for you, it does not matter, right? You don't have to rebuild silently at the background while you are not actually using the code, right? So when you're using serve mode, you can't use the watch mode. So here I'm going to remove this watch option and just hit serve, right? So I visit this, and when I visit this, as soon as I hit this request, esbuild will rebuild this code for me, and now this is the build output. So what if I want to view the other files besides the file that's being built by esbuild? Well, then you have to serve it from somewhere, right? You have to serve it from a folder, then you have to specify the folder. So here, let's create that folder first. So I'm going to create a public folder, and I'm going to create a file called index.html, which is going to be a very basic HTML code with a script tag. And the script tag is going to point to the index.js, the scripts that we're going to build out, right? So here we are building to index.js. So we are going to request this index.js from the build code. So let's see how we run this. Right? So instead of serve, we're going to say serve dir, which is the serve directory. And we're going to say a public, right? Because we are serving from the public directory. Let's try to hit this. And now we see an error. Well, we are building into this directory, but we are serving from the public directory. There are two different directories, right? So when you're visiting something where you kind of like see that the this.index.js is not going to be built into the public folder, so it does not work that way. Right? Of course, we want to serve from the public folder, so let's build into the public folder. So here I'm going to say public index.js, right? Hit this, and now let's try and visit this again. Similarly, we are serving our HTML file. If you can't see, you can't tell, let's look at the network tab. Let's refresh this again. We are serving our HTML. Let's look at response. Yes, this is the HTML that we just written, and it requests for index.js. Oh, if you look at index.js, this is our build code bundle on request. So here you go, the serve function from esbuild. So now let's take a look at how we can configure esbuild. Esbuild itself comes with a lot of options that you can configure them, and they are all available in the esbuild documentation. So here we are at the documentation site. Over here in the API, you see that there's two sections, right? Simple options and advanced options. So here are all the options that you can use to configure esbuild. So previously, when we were talking about in other previous videos about rollup and webpack, we mentioned about three different phases of bundling, right? We have the resolving to find all the dependencies of the entry files, and then we have transforming or loading, which is to transform the code to JavaScript if they are not, and then we have the bundling phase, right? And we've seen how we can configure each of them at in rollup and webpack. And for esbuild, these options are scattered around over here. Okay, so they are sorted in alphabetical order, but you would have to know what you need to look for them. So options for resolving, we have options such as the main fields, the preserve symlinks and things like that, resolve extensions for resolving options. And for transforming, you see here we have JSX factory. We have things such as how we can like TS configurations for transforming TypeScript files. And for bundling phase, we have our tree shaking options, and we have a lot of other things over here. But they're all sorted in alphabetical order, so you have to kind of know, or maybe you can just glance through all of them at once so that you kind of know what is available for esbuild, and then you configure them. So another way of configuring your module bundles like rollup or webpack is to use plugins. Right? Plugins is a way to tap into the build step and to transform, to change the way how the module bundle itself behaves. And esbuild supports plugins, and the plugins are mainly for both resolving and transforming the code. Right? In this video, we're probably not going to go into deep dive to take a look at how we can write a plugin, but it's available over here in the plugins section of the documentation. So plugins are mostly written in JavaScript, and so there's an interesting thing happening over here because esbuild is written in Golang, and it's compiled into binary when you use it. And so this Golang code will have to talk to the JavaScript code, so they maintain some sort of communication whenever you use esbuild to build something when you have a JavaScript plugins. So how this communication works is very interesting, but I don't think we're gonna delve into it in this video. So hopefully I have time and talk about it in a later video. So before we go, let's quickly take a look at one example of the plugin so that we have a sense of how esbuild plugin looks like. Over here in this using plugin section, we see that this is how a plugins look like, and to use this plugin, you pass this into a plugins option list. Right? So the plugin itself looks like this. Right? It has a name and a setup function. So setup is where you set up everything for the plugin. And in the plugin, you can control how you resolve a certain files and how you load the file and how you transform it. Right? So that's all for esbuild plugin, unfortunately, in this video. And hopefully we have more time to explore and try to write one ourselves. But before we end, let's take a look at a summary of what we have learned so far. Esbuild is a module bundle that is way faster than its contemporary because it's written in an entirely different language and it implements its own parser. We've seen how we can use esbuild in a CLI as well as a Node API for bundling, watching and serving files. Right, so that's all for this video. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so, and see you in the next video. So see ya, bye bye.